Okay, I have to say, given how I looked in my last video, I'm glad I've decided to make myself look half decent for this one. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I hope you're doing well, and today we're going to be doing my wrap up for the month of April. So last month I read, I think it was a total of 12 books, which I'm quite surprised I managed to do, especially since 2 of them at least were chunky ones, the ones that I absolutely had to read. There was another one I didn't end up reading because the 2 I had to read were so big and I just was not in the mood for a bigger book. So my page count was about 6,250 pages, which I'm quite shocked I managed to read that much, especially since book wise it's not the biggest amount of books I read. I think not much. February was the biggest with 17 and this month was only 12. But in hindsight, pages I read in February was 5,700 and this month was 625. So yes, I'm quite surprised with what I managed to read last month. So the way this wrap up's going to work is I'm not going to go through the books in order because I just can't be asked. But I'm going to go through the books that I owned that I read first, and then I'm going to go into the ones that I didn't own. Alright, so the first 2 I want to talk about was the last 2 books in the Caraval series, and that was Legendary and Finale. So I read Caraval back in March as part of the Last to Read book club. Didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first time reading it, but I still gave it a fairly, I think it was 3.5 I gave it this time around, whereas last time I think I gave it 4. But yes, so in Caraval we follow a girl who essentially writes to the owner of this travelling circus to essentially ask for his help in essentially getting her out of a scandalous marriage, but he decides to take the sister instead and everything transpires. So these are books 2 and 3. I had read Legendary before, absolutely loved it. Reread it again, absolutely loved it. I think, when did I rate this one? I cannot remember. So Legendary I gave 3.5 stars and this one I gave 4 stars. I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to unhaul these books or not because they are on my shelf destruct for 2022. And basically my way of thinking was, once I read these books, if I didn't enjoy them enough to keep them, I'd unhaul them, and still if I hadn't read them I would unhaul them anyway. But I will definitely be keeping these because holy shit, book 3, this one, holy crap, I devoured this in about a day. I absolutely enjoyed it, I loved it. I even made a whole spread for the whole series in my reading journal. That's how much I enjoyed the finale. So aptly titled Finale. So those are the first 2 books I owned that, well, technically I didn't read them first, I read these last, but this is the first 2 out of the pile of books I actually own. Okay, so the next 2 I want to talk about are continuations of the series. So we have The Mothcatcher and Thin Air. So this one is book 7 in the Vera Stanhope series, and this is book 6. So I read these as part of, don't know what it was the magic. I think I was able to use both these prompts for the Magical Readathon and Realmathon. So this one we followed, it's so hard to remember because I read this first. So basically there's 2 murders. There's the body of an archaeologist who's found dead, and then not later on the housekeeper of the house he's found dead in is found dead, I think. Is that right? I don't know, I can't remember. So I really enjoyed this one. I think I gave this one, I did put it in my reading journal. Okay, so I rated The Mothcatcher, where it is, 4.5 stars. And then Shetland, this book was about, so a group of old university friends left to celebrate one of the marriage of their friends, and then the night before, is it the bridesmaid, I think her name was? One of the wedding party disappears. I can't remember whether she was a bridesmaid or that, but basically she disappears one night and leaves this note saying, "You're never going to find me alive, don't even bother." And that's when the cops are called in. So I really quite like this as well. I think, what did I rate this? I rated this 4. Probably the plot did slow down a little bit for me, but other than that, I quite enjoyed it. I always enjoyed Anne's books. So yeah, that was great. I loved it. One of the last ones I have owned physically that I read in the month of April was Honey Trap by Tate James. So this is the Fable Crate edition. So this is a gangster romance book. It's very dark romance, I'd say. This book is not going to be for everybody. If I was younger than I am now, I probably would never have touched this book in a million years. But I was quite surprised. So basically it follows 2 main characters. We have Danny and Leon. And Danny is essentially... Leon basically foils this assassination attempt on Danny, who turns out... They both turn out to be members of this thing called the Guild. And this is like this superior... They're like an assassination, mob of assassins, I'd say. That's my description of it. You can't correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way I describe it. To start with, it sort of was dragging a bit. I thought, oh, come on, hurry up, we've got to get somewhere. But holy shit, there's one particular sex scene in here. I sort of went, like, is this real? You come up with this stuff, I have no idea. Yeah, but I really enjoyed it, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get the other 2, because I wanted to read this first to make sure I loved it before I bought the complete set, and I've pre-ordered the set. So, what did I give this? I can't remember. Okay, so I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Not the best book. It probably didn't pick up for me. It's about the halfway point, so bear that in mind going into this, but I quite enjoyed it. No one was surprised more than me as to how much I actually enjoyed this. I'm quite surprised. But yeah, very keen to see what happens, especially the way this book ended. I'm thinking, oh my god. Yeah. Okay, so the next 2 books I want to talk about were buddy reads. The first one being The Stand by Stephen King. So this was part of the Stand by Me-a-thon. I can't think today. Which was hosted by Paige and Krystal from Bond Book Reviews and Pages with Paige. So thank you so much to the girls for that. This is my first Stephen King novel, and I was quite surprised. Basically, what this is it's about this virus that basically spreads from this test facility after this guy gets out, and he ends up taking the wife, the kids, across, I think it was about 3 borders before they crash into this gas station. And we were talking in the group chat, and the similarities to the pandemic and the way that spread and the way the virus spread in this book, and like everyone's just dropping like flies, and I'm like, holy shit, like this is a bit too surreal for me. I probably wouldn't have read this back in 2020 when the pandemic first hit, but it's not the best book. So the main gripe that a lot of us had was the book's length. So this was just over, I think, how many pages was it? I cannot remember. 1,211 pages. My biggest gripe was that it had too much filler. So essentially you're following so many characters, and you got to try and remember all their names and who's shacking up with who and who's going where. And at one point I'm thinking, oh my god, can we just move on? And I think another biggest gripe for me was the fact that it kind of felt like 2 books mashed together. So the first half was really, really interesting, just the way this virus spreads and the way it affects people and just that. But then it sort of did a whole separate part going into the second half. I'm thinking, is there a point to this? Like, if it was more a book about, if it just focused on, the pandemic half a lot better, like made that the main focus, and how do we rebuild society after pretty much 95% of the population has just dropped dead. There was one point in the book I thought, shit, this is a bit quite real. And there was a scene where there's this couple in this abandoned house, and I don't think she was pregnant. I can't remember their names, there was too many. But there's this woman who can't eat, and the guy that's with her keeps saying, well, why can't she eat, why can't she eat? And she said, oh, he says to her, "Oh, can I close the window?" And when he closes it, she said, "Is that bad?" She said, "Yeah." And it's just like, oh my god, like when everybody is pretty much died around you, like it would take a long time for the smell. Well, it makes me sick just thinking about the smell of decomposing bodies. It's just, it's really surreal how he, like, did he predict COVID? Right, okay, COVID wasn't it's bad, but it's not as, like, severe as what this book made this virus out to be, but yeah, it was just a lot of filler for a 1,200 page book. I definitely reckon it could have been trimmed. And another thing that quite got to me was the way he used certain slurs to describe people. So he used, the R one, the N one, the various others. I'm thinking, like, is this really necessary? Like, Stephen King, do we really need you to describe people like this? I'm just like, it's definitely a product of its time. That's what I would say. But yeah, I can only give this a low 3 stars. I was quite surprised that I gave it that, because the premise was so good. It was so good. I really liked the idea of, okay, how do you rebuild a society after shit's fucked, basically. That's how I describe it. But yeah, sadly not the best book I read last month, but I'm definitely keen to try more of Stephen King. This was my first time reading him. As I said, it's very hard to as I said, it is a product of its time. If you want to do it, but would I read it again? No. Thanks. I have to shout out Erin for giving us the audiobook, because most of that was audio. I had to go through most of the book with audio because it wouldn't have worked otherwise. So thank you to Erin for that. But yes, the stand I could only give 3 stars. Alright, so the second book club book I want to talk about was Drums of Autumn by Diana Gavaldon. So this is book 4 in the Outlander series. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. This is part of the read along I'm doing with a whole bunch of other booktubers, YouTube, or Twitter users. I'll leave a link to that page down below. So basically we've just decided to read Outlander throughout the year of 2022. So this month, as I'm filming this, we are in May, so I'll be picking up book 5 this month. Hopefully I can get through to that, but yeah, Drums of Autumn, unfortunately, I only got 3.5 out of 5 stars. Voyager's been my favourite so far out of the 4 that I've read. So in Outlander we follow a World War II nurse called Claire, who essentially, whilst on honeymoon with her second husband, touches these stones and gets transported back to basically before the Battle of Culloden, and she meets Jamie Fraser. That is all. It's these books are just getting so big. I'm like, holy shit, and I've still got another 6 to go. But yeah, don't have too much to say about this. I can't do that without spoilers, but not my favourite book, but it's not the worst. I think the lowest, actually I think I've pretty much given all the other books 3.5 apart from Voyager, so it'll be interesting to see how it is going forward, because plot wise in the TV show, book 4 is where I'm up to, so it'll be interesting to see the parallels now going forward between book and TV show, but we shall see. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is a library book, and this is probably one of my favourite books of the month, and that was Verity by Colleen Hoover. So this was on my 12 recommendations for 2022, and thank you so much to Ashley from Thoroughly Booked for recommending this to me. Holy shit, is Colleen Hoover okay? That is my main question. Is she okay? So this follows a author called Loan Ashley, who is basically on the verge of becoming broke and homeless when she encounters the husband of this author, who basically has slipped into a coma, and he is looking for a writer to essentially write the rest of Verity's books. So she ends up staying at his place, and while she's there she uncovers the it's like a autobiography, essentially, of Verity's life, and holy shit, the half this book I was just going, what the actual fuck? That's pretty much been anyone's reaction I've seen who's read Verity. Basically, all I can say is, what the fuck? But for a first Colleen Hoover book, I really enjoyed it. I know she reads. I know she writes a lot of romance. It's not my favourite genre personally. I do enjoy a bit of romance, but it's not a genre I necessarily gravitate towards. But this is more of a thriller than romance, and yeah, what the fuck? That's all I can say about that one. Okay, so the next two I want to talk about were library books as well. The first being was How I Became a Dog Called Midnight by Ben Miller. This is a middle grade, and this centres around a young boy whose father is the caretaker of this estate, and they basically help this older rich lady take care of this house. And one day the owner brings home this guy that she met whilst on a boat, and he has a dog called Midnight. And basically the young boy uncovers this sort of scheme result. Like, he suspects that this husband is not who he says he is, and basically one day he witnesses a magic act and becomes the dog called Midnight. So I absolutely loved this book. It was my first book by Ben Miller I've read, and holy shit, I devoured this in one sitting. It was such a cute little whimsy middle grade. I'd highly recommend this to anyone who has kids, even who enjoys middle grade. Like, I'm a 31-year-old woman and I loved it. So yeah, like I said, I devoured this book in one setting. Absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read more for Ben's work. Last library book I want to talk about is not a middle grade, but it was a YA. Is it YA? I don't think it is. It was kind of like a new adult, I'd say. It was The Lila Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring-Blake. So this one I saw through Paige's channel. I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a go. Okay, so I rated this 3.5 out of 5 stars. So this follows a girl called Delilah Green, who basically is invited back home to take her sister's wedding photos, essentially, and then she essentially runs into another girl called Claire, who is part of the sister's bridal party, and they kind of hit it off straight away and basically sort of start seeing each other whilst this is all happening, and essentially they sort of they become part of this plan to essentially try and convince the sister that the husband's a douchebag. And what you do see of him, he is a douchebag pretty much. This was quite alright. Like I said, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Probably wouldn't read it again. It's not a genre I gravitate towards, but I quite enjoyed it. Quite like the dynamic between Delilah and Claire. Yeah, so, and there is a second book which follows the sister of Delilah, but I won't go into the details about that because it will spoil the book if you do want to read it. But yeah, it was cute. I loved it. Not, like I say, it's not a genre I gravitate towards, so probably, like I say, I probably wouldn't pick it up again. But I enjoyed it. I really did. Okay, and there's two more books I want to talk about. One was an e-arc I got, and that was These Twisted Bonds by Lexi Ryan. So this is the sequel to These Hollow Vows, which was probably one of my favourite reads of last year. I was a little bit disappointed by this one. Yeah, it's, how do I say this? It reminded me too much of Agatha. So if you've read Agatha, you've basically read how this one sort of plays out. I won't go into too much details there. So in the first one, we follow a girl called Bree, who is essentially has to go and rescue her sister from these fairies after she gets sold. The sister gets sold to them by the stepmother, and she essentially makes this deal with the king to try and overthrow another fairy prince. And there's a love triangle, and it's wild. But yeah, I was just really disappointed. I really well wrote in my journal because this probably best sums it up a lot better. unfortunately felt a little flat. The character arcs were too similar to Akata and made the plot feel a little bit too predictable. Didn't have the same enjoyment level as the first book. And no, I gave it 3 stars. No, 3 or 3.5? I cannot remember. 3 stars. Yeah, so unfortunately I could only give this 3 stars. It was so disappointing too, because I was really looking forward to the sequel. But yeah, unfortunately I didn't love it that much. But thank you so much to the publishers for approving me for that arc. I'm just so sad I didn't love it as much as I thought. Okay, and the very last book I want to talk about was a ebook that I got off. Well, I kind of read this in 2 parts. I read this from the library, and then I had the audio book through Audible, and that was How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. So in this one we follow Grace, who is essentially in a prison for a crime she didn't commit, and while she's in there she essentially documents about the crimes she did commit. So basically this main character discovered when she was a child that her father didn't want her when her mother told him she was pregnant, and the father was essentially this guy from a rich family and just pretty much shunned them off, and he didn't want anything to do with them. So basically after the mum dies, Grace decides to take revenge on the family who abandoned her pretty much. I like the premise of this book. I could only give it, I think it's 3.5, wasn't it? I could only give this 3 stars. I'll read the thing, my thoughts off this again. So she's recalling how, of course, she wiped out her family whilst in jail for a crime she didn't commit. So this book started off really strong, and I was really invested. Unfortunately, the story felt a little too long-winded and didn't really get interesting until the last quarter. And there was quite a nice twist at the end. So yeah, my main gripe was that I think Grace waffled on a bit too much. She's like, how she did this, that. I'm like, oh, come on, honey, let's just speed it up a bit. I did like some of the snarky comments that she left at the beginning, but yeah, this just didn't feel quite right for me. It was very, very average. I probably would never pick it up again. Alrighty, so this, and not including the other books I don't have, is part of my April wrap-up. I'm quite surprised at how many books I did manage to get through, because like I said at the beginning of the book, it's at the beginning of the video, so I should say, I need coffee, I desperately. I'm quite surprised I managed to read 12 books last month, especially, as I said, having Drums of Boredom and The Stand, which were chunkers. They were over 1,000 pages each. I honestly did not expect to read as much as I did, but thankfully it worked out. Okay, so that is where I'll leave this video for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this. As always, all my links will be down below, as well as links to Paige's channel, Krystal's channel. Any channel or page I've mentioned in this video will be linked down below, so you guys can go check it out. But thank you guys so much for sticking through it this long, even though I desperately need caffeine at the moment. But yes, thank you guys so much for sticking this out. If you liked this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. Let me know how many books you guys managed to read last month. And yeah, I shall see you guys in the next one.